Hey guys, Sean here. Yes, interest rates are going up, markets are crashing, and everyone is freaking out. But there's an even bigger crisis just brewing on the horizon, ready to take down the global economy. Everyone is talking about stocks going down and the price of gas going up, but we are missing the big picture and we need to focus on the elephant in the room. And it's the national debt bubble that's real close to popping. Now, the big problem with fighting this self inflicted inflation crisis is the hidden dangers that will blow up when you start to raise interest rates. Right now, there is a big problem staring us in the face that has been building up for decades, and it's a real simple one. America's reaching the point where it can't pay back the money it owes. When you and me, we take a loan from the bank, and if we can't pay back the full sum and the interest, it will just snowball and snowball to the point we have to declare bankruptcy. And this applies to the national debt. But this national bankruptcy is going to make everyone around the world, especially Americans, a whole lot poorer. There is a reason why Powell is baby stepping his way with the interest rate hikes with 50 basis points here, 75 basis points there, because he knows with every percent that the rates go up, the debt bubble and the chance for default gets exponentially bigger. We know today in our consumerist culture, everything revolves around spending and growth, and this is one department where the federal government excels in. Now, the current debt stands around $30 trillion, which is triple of what it was back in 2008. But take a look back in early 2020, within just 2 years, over $6 trillion was borrowed. Now, if we investigate further and view the national debt to GDP, we can see that it is more than 130% of the country's GDP. Now, this is literally insane. We have come to the point that the debt can never fully be paid back, and the conversation today is only about interest payments. Forget about paying back the capital amount, we can only pay back the interest. It's like you are so deep in debt, you'll be giving your local loan shark payments for the rest of your life so that you won't get beaten up. And once you pass on, your children and future generations will have to keep the payments up or they get beaten up too. For a long time, this system, as twisted as it sounds, was working, and that was because interest rates were so low. The interest payments could be made so that you could kick the can down the road and run even greater deficits every single year. Remember that since 2000, interest rates were cratering and have been near zero for over a decade. But things are changing, and the Fed has no choice but to raise rates to fight at 8.3% inflation, which realistically feels more like 15 or 20% in places that truly matter, our food and fuel. And to really fight against soaring prices, the rates will have to be much higher than just 8% or even 10%. However, you'll quickly understand why this is becoming impossible. In 2021, the US paid around $562 billion on interest payments alone. Now, this is more than half of the defense budget and double that of infrastructure spending, and this is at a 1.5% interest rate. Now, this should frighten you, because if rates were to go up, the US debt payments will also rise. Now, if rates on the US debt rise to 3%, the interest payments will be more than $1 trillion. If it reaches 6%, the amount will balloon to 2 trillion, and that is assuming the debt amount just stays the same. But that isn't the case, right? The US has been running deficits since 2001. That was the last time it had a surplus, and to cover the deficits, you guessed it, more borrowing is done and the national debt just gets bigger and bigger. Now, this puts the Fed in a crazy dilemma, and probably the reason why Powell is starting to age real fast. I mean, you can see the stress just showing on his face, right? He has to raise rates because Biden is committed to fight inflation in order to stay elected. But if Powell raises rates too high, he will trigger a snowball effect on the interest payments that will just pile onto the new debt. It's like maxing out your current set of credit cards and then maxing out another bunch of cards to pay for the interest owed. But come next month, now you have two sets of bills to pay, two sets of credit cards to settle. Plus, just recently, Biden has gotten Congress approval to give Ukraine a $40 billion aid package, and guess where the money will come from? Borrowing future money to spend today. So this means there will be a cap on how much the Fed can raise rates. Many of us think that perhaps the Fed will do a Paul Volcker and jack rates up to 10% or even 20%, but that is impossible. Back in 1980, the debt to GDP was only 30% and the amount owed was only $800 billion. Now that's 35 times less than today's debt of $30 trillion. And if you think the US has reserves to pay down the debt or even the interest payments, wait till you take a look at this, you'll be in for a rude awakening. Remember that the US Treasury doesn't need to hold dollars, they don't need to hold their own currency, they can just print them through the Federal Reserve. So we can see that if we combine just the cash and currency reserves, we get less than $250 billion. And if we throw in the gold reserves of 261 million ounces at 2,000 per ounce, right? Let's just round it up. We get around $522 billion. That means if everything was liquidated, it won't even make up 1.5 times of yearly interest payments on the debt. But at what interest rates will the debt just get unserviceable, right? At what point will the debt just balloon to the point that payments can't be made? Because if we have a benchmark, we can really gauge how far the Fed rate hikes can get. Now, a projection study done by the Manhattan Institute has found that if rates were to increase gradually to 6.6% by 2051, the interest would be 100% of the government's yearly revenue. And the debt to GDP ratio would just be shy of 300%. This means all the money the government gets from taxes won't be able to service the debt. And that's why you can see interest rates hike going lower and lower as time goes on. And this leaves very few options for the US government to get out of this mess. They have to find a way to pay the interest, or it would mean a default, and the status of the dollar as a reserve currency will be in serious trouble. If a default happens, this will be a catastrophe, and the country will see an economic winter like no other. The US will effectively help the world de-dollarize. So no matter the cost, the interest payments will have to be paid. But at the same time, interest rates will go up because Powell needs to fight inflation, or at least act like it's doing something. And that means there's only flexibility to do two things without resorting to printing money and causing hyperinflation. Now, the first is spending cuts. This is going to be very unpopular and politically just painful. I mean, everything from healthcare, social security, defense, and infrastructure will have cutbacks. Hell, even sending one of Elon Musk's rockets to the moon will need to stop for the time being. But this is dangerous because over 30% of GDP spending is contributed by the federal government itself. So if you cut too much, the economy grinds to a halt. But if you don't cut enough, the deficit continues to pile up. Now, the second is to increase tax revenues, but this isn't easy as well. The US has some of the highest personal income and corporate taxes in the world, and there is a tipping point before the rich starts to run away. People will start cheating on their taxes, and companies will just move elsewhere. And that is why it isn't an easy problem to solve, and the cure for inflation, which is higher interest rates, might just finish off the patient thanks to the debt problem. This means we need to prepare for two deadly possibilities. Both are horrible, but it's just around the corner and a matter of time. Firstly, the debt bubble isn't sustainable, and you can't just keep raising the debt ceiling forever. If one day this problem keeps compounding and the debt ceiling isn't raised, the US could default on the interest payments, and that alone will spark a financial nuclear winter of the economy. And this means any future borrowing will be at a crazy high interest rates, bondholders could be left with nothing, pension funds will fail, and the stock market will crash. Now, confidence in the dollar and the US economy will be at rock bottom. If you think the S&P going down 20 or 30% is bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Now, the more likely scenario is that the Fed will slam the brakes on the rate hike and start reversing course. Rates will hit back down to zero, the debt will become easier to service. At the same time, spending cuts can be done to rein in the overall debt amount. Now, if we do go down this road, then there will be a prolonged period of stagflation like what we're experiencing right now. High inflation rate while the economy is contracting. Food and fuel prices will continue to be sky high, while local American assets could continue to gradually drop. Not exactly ideal, but much better than a total default. But either way, we could be in store of a prolonged bear market in the United States. And as investors, we need to prepare or at least hedge against this scenario because it is getting more real with each passing day. Now, there are two things we can do, and the first is to consider diversifying out of the United States. You want to hold good stocks in foreign countries and not just rely on the S&P 500. Now, one great ETF I personally invest in is the VXUS. It stands for the Vanguard Total International Stock Fund, and it allows you to buy into thousands of the strongest foreign companies like Toyota, Samsung, and Shell Oil. Plus, the expense ratio is just 0.07%, and that is easily covered by their dividend yield, which is consistently above 2 to 3%. Now, the other way is to simply buy hard assets that can't be debased, like gold. Because if interest rates get slammed down again to near zero and inflation ramps up, people will just flock to commodities, especially gold. It has protected purchasing power for generations and has been proven to be an inflation hedge and a reliable store of value. And if the unthinkable happens, if the United States really defaults on its debt, trust in the dollar will just plummet and there will be a gigantic rush to sound money to monetary precious metals. And that means gold will suddenly shoot up to 3K, 5K, and even 10K and beyond easily. Because it's not just a local currency and debt that's been solvent, it's the world reserve currency that is in serious crisis. And this just circles back to the need to be financially responsible. When you borrow money, you have to pay it back or there will be horrible consequences. When we get a loan and we don't pay it back, eventually we'll become bankrupt and our reputation will take a big hit. Now, the same thing will happen to the United States, but it will be the dollar that will be sacrificed and everyone's purchasing power will evaporate. There's no need to worry about China or Russia trying to de-dollarize or getting the world to use the ruble or the yuan, because if the debt bubble pops, it'll be the most epic own goal in the history books. Will we get to 10% interest rates? I don't believe we can. Even 5 or 6% will be a stretch because it will turn the interest payments on the debt into a monster that will just devour the whole economy. But hey, we can always just revive the $1 trillion platinum coin idea and pay down the debt in a second and just sit back and wait for hyperinflation to hit. So let me know what you think. How bad do you think the debt crisis has gotten? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you all for watching and I'll see you soon.